Hi, and welcome back to the Recruitment and Beyond podcast. We are joined, as usual, by Natalie from Beyond HR. And of course, we're now joined today by Paul Reid from Trickle. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself and about Trickle?
Thanks, Ewan, and thanks, Natalie. So my name is Paul Reid. I'm the founder and the CEO of Trickle. We're a startup based in Edinburgh. We help organisations understand what's important to their people, but then more importantly, to engage and then act on the back of that. We do a lot of work in the public sector with NHS, but more recently doing work with private sector organisations as well. My background is I started as a techie, used to write code, and now they don't let me anywhere near that. So I help grow the business, and I help sign up new partners and customers.
That's it. You've got to play to your strengths. That's exactly where you should be. Yep. Oh, that's good. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. As Paul's mentioned, a big part of what we're going to talk about today is employee engagement. So, I mean, it's a key topic. I did a bit of research into this just before, and the volume of searches around employee engagement and how we can get involved with our employees and ensure that we can retain our best talent is a key topic right now. And it's obviously something that Trickle's doing a lot of. That's one of your core functions. So do you want to give us your thoughts on what is employee engagement? What is it, and what was the problem, I suppose, you were trying to solve with Trickle when you first started it?
Okay, cool. So employee engagement for me is really simple, right? I think it can be overcomplicated. For me, it's about having relevant conversations with your people about what they think is important. And I think that what's changed is that traditionally engagement in organizations, going back decades and decades, was more like communication. It was, if you take the pyramid hierarchy, right, that most organizations still have, exec teams at the top, and then your kind of frontline staff along the flat of the pyramid, communication and engagement was typically top down, right? It's like, here's what's important to the organization. Here's our objectives, here's our performance. And you take that on board as an employee, and then you apply that to your role. What I think needs to happen in the modern world is that you need a complementary view, which is the ground up view of the organization, right? What's important to your people? Why should what's important to your people be any less important than what's important to the organization, right? And I think that the world of work has changed massively in the last, especially over the pandemic, but certainly over the last 5 years, where in some ways it's almost like employees interview the organization now, right? Why should I work for you? And I think that for me, that's a positive change, right? I think it's about understanding a fit, right? Is the organization a good place to work? Those types of things. So engagement for me is about having those conversations, two-way conversations, right? The top-down view of the organization blended with a ground-up view of what's important to your people. And if you understand both those perspectives, then you get good engagement in the middle, right? You get balanced engagement. You get here's what's important to the organization, but also here's what's important to us as employees within that organization. And the reason I started Trickle, sorry to answer your second question, was that I don't think that happens enough, right? I don't think that people have the right conversations in the organizations we all work for, especially at scale, right? If you start getting to hundreds of employees and thousands of employees, that's very, very difficult to do.
So is it, like you mentioned this in terms of the pandemic, is it a new concept? Is it something that you've seen? I think you mentioned that in the last 5 years or so, it's something that's really changed, and is it something that companies have been grappling with for a while? Is it quite a new thing in terms of new generation coming into the workforce, do you think?
It shouldn't be a new thing, right? But I worry that it is. I think when Trickle was founded, 5 years ago, Harvard Business Review front cover was all about culture being the only differentiator that big organizations have, right? If you look at Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, right, they're all doing very, very similar tech services and products, etc. And culture is a way for those organizations to differentiate themselves. So I think that employee engagement kind of became a big topic as part of that that change in the world, if you like. People should have been worrying about employee engagement as long as organizations have existed, in my view. But again, back to my previous point, I feel that it's been traditionally top down, right? It's been one way. And I think the new bit, right, is that organizations recognize that doesn't cut it anymore. And, we need a better way of doing it, and a kind of more natural way of doing it, right? Conversations should naturally be two-way. So why should it be any different at work?
It's almost like the light bulb was switched on for some people now, isn't it? And it should have always been, you're right, it should have always been. But then the light bulb switched on, and the more kind of HR problems or more people problems, people are thinking, oh, we're missing something. And the answer's always been employee engagement, but maybe the light bulbs came on and the answer most definitely is employee engagement now, isn't it? It's always been there though, but you're right, there's much more of an emphasis now. And if you were missing it before, it's not really optional anymore.
I think that's the difference, Natalie. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think that the difference is because things like Trickle now can allow you to measure it and to see the impact, I suppose, or has it always been something people have been able to measure? Because I think that's the big thing quite often if you're running the business. Well, does it matter? Our bottom line is still performing, but actually your staff are not happy, and you're starting to see things like high attrition levels. People are just leaving all the time. Is it something that now that technology is helping us to measure that, which makes it easier to understand, do you think?
So I think there's two parts to that. I think technology absolutely makes it easier to measure. I mean, you could measure it before, right? If you take an annual survey, right, as being a traditional way of engaging with people, right? Let's go back 20 years and people were filling in paper. Probably there's sometimes people do that now, right? But the bottom line is you can say we've surveyed 200 people and 180 have responded, therefore our engagement is 90%, right? That's a very basic way of measuring engagement that you could always do. I think the thing that's really important, certainly from our perspective, and the reason that we created Trickle is that what's the purpose of that engagement, right? Why do you want to have good engagement? And for us, it's a really, really simple concept. Good engagement, in our view, should be about progressing the organization in the form of improvement. And when we say improvement, we mean not just improvement to the employee experience, but improvement to the services you provide, the products you build, improvement to the people you serve, right? The stakeholders, the customers, the patients, whatever they might be. And for us, that's really the focus of engagement. And therefore, the technology does help because it helps you measure the impact, right? So it's not just how many people are we talking to, it is what is the impact of those conversations that we're having? Because if it's just about volume of conversations, for me, I'm not interested in that, right? You can have lots of conversations, but not much impact. I'd rather see fewer conversations, but much more impact from those conversations.
It's a good name, isn't it, Trickle?
It depends.
It's catchy. It's good.
If you miss out the R, then we sometimes get wound up about that, and we're in the wrong industry. If you look at that way. But no, we do get a lot of positive feedback about the name. Thank you.
Where did it come from? Yeah, where did it come from?
Genuine story. I keep my phone at the side of my bed because sometimes I come up with ideas in the middle of the night or whatever. And it was, when was it? It was about 2016. My last business was acquired by a FTSE 50 organisation, and we had about 80 staff, and we got merged into this organisation with 70,000 employees. And up until that point, our business had been fantastic, right? People joined our company and stayed for years and years. Like, I mean, coming as a graduate and then married and kids and all that kind of stuff. It was just a brilliant working environment. And what we found is when we became part of this organisation, very quickly the culture fell on its backside. And the reason for that was that when we were a private business, we talked really openly about, the things that I talk about now, what's important to the people. People had ideas, they knew who to speak to. The ideas became part of the solution. They had a great sense of belonging. And in a big organization, that's much harder, right, to get that positive employee experience. And when I woke up in the middle of the night, the business was going pretty well, but people were unhappy. So it was performing well, but the morale was poor. And what struck me was that I wished I had a way where I could trickle the feedback of how people were feeling throughout the organization, right? Because it's that layer challenge, right? We were, instead of me being at the top of the pyramid of a business of 80 people, we were then a very small business unit of a massive organization. And in order to get that to the people that need to see it to make the right decisions, you've got to get it through the hierarchy, right? And the concept of Trickle is that if you can get that when it starts small, right, and you can understand it, then you can hopefully act on that and prevent it from becoming a much bigger challenge,
No, spot on.
Interested to know the stories about all the keyboard warriors in the middle of the night that maybe jumped to social media. Do you find that they maybe jump to Trickle instead then if the business maybe has, or do they do both? Do you know those ones where
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we like to think that we help with, and I think we do help with, is being that intermediary, right? So you've got Glassdoor and various other platforms where people can go and they can say, hey, I work at company X and here's the positives and here's the negatives. And, you ideally don't want negatives getting out there, right? Because that affects your recruitment process and all these things. The thing with Trickle is that you can be very open in it, right? And it's very deliberately about open and honest feedback. And sometimes people would have a fear around that, but the key is that it's within the organization, right? So it's feedback that you can see, it's prioritized for you. And if you can engage around that and people can see that you're having conversations about what they think is important, that's usually deemed to be a very, very positive working environment. And if you can capture things in that environment and prevent them from going into things like Glassdoor, then for us, we would say that would be a really positive way to run your business,
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. I suppose it's an internal product that, and it means that you're dealing with that information, and it gives people a place to vent their, if there are frustrations, it gives them an opportunity to do that without having to promote that to the outside world. I appreciate there's value in that as well, but it's important to try and help people deal with these situations, internally, and have a route for frustration, particularly if we're all working remotely now. People are working in various different places, so it's a good opportunity to do that.
The other thing is that you don't really want nasty surprises, right? So if people are having conversations about things that are frustrating, they're having them whether you've got an engagement platform or not, right? And what the engagement platform does, certainly in Trickle's case, is it helps you understand those, right? It helps you see them. And if you can then engage around them, then that's a progressive conversation, right? And that's really the kind of aim, certainly within Trickle, is to make sure that conversations are progressive. But there's also two routes of doing it, right? One is that you can share something with the community being your colleagues, and say, look, I think we should be doing this instead of that. And people will either agree or disagree. But if you've got things that are maybe a bit more personal, then you can have private conversations as well, right? So it's not just about things that are shared in the community. There's also ways to get support for stress or having a relationship issue and you don't know who to speak to about it,
Yeah, and I guess that was one of the questions I was going to chat to you about, is that if I'm a leader of an organization, big or small, I suppose, this employee engagement part of it, why do I care? Is it productivity? Is it retention? Is it innovation? Is that what we're trying to drive? And I suppose, is that what Trickle's bringing to the table, is this opportunity to affect these key areas? Because obviously businesses want to be more productive. They want to garner that innovation, which comes from inclusion and the opportunity to engage with people, but also retaining our best staff. All these different elements are part of this whole employee engagement process, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it covers all these aspects. And I would say that if you go back a few years, organizations were probably more tuned into the morale side of things, right? Especially during the pandemic. It's like everyone's remote. Let's understand morale and let's engage with people to make sure that we're kind of doing our service as employers, right? Making sure we're looking after people. What's interesting about the platform is we obviously don't control what people speak about in the platform, right? What we provide is a platform where you can see what's important and you can progress that to outcomes. But we see and we hear success stories from our customers, like and especially in healthcare. My favorite one was an echocardiogram, which is an ultrasound scan of the heart. There was a group of junior doctors at one of our organization, one of our customers, and somebody had said, hey, this is frustrating because after the test performed, it takes about 30 minutes to get the result. And that became like in their top 5. So the way that Trickle works is things get promoted and then we encourage people to review the top 5, right? So they reviewed that and then they had a discussion within Trickle. People can be optionally anonymous. You tend to get better solutions because it's more inclusive and people can be more open because of that optional anonymity. And within about 6 weeks, they'd reached a workaround where the echocardiogram results became instantaneous, right? There was no 30-minute delay anymore. Now, that is a really good example of employee-led innovation, right? Because it started with somebody being frustrated and it ended up being a conversation where it was like, well, we could try this, we could try that. And from what I understand, it wasn't any kind of massive budget that went into that. It was just workarounds and different ways of working that produced this solution, right? And for me, that's the modern value in a platform like that. Okay, it's great to know about morale, but every organization now is trying to be more productive and more effective, more efficient, right? Ourselves included. And the best way to do that is understand the little pebbles that are in the shoes, because the people that have got those pebbles in their shoes are usually the ones that know what to do about it, right?
Yeah.
And if you can tune into that and make little tweaks and be agile in the way that you adapt to frustrations and challenges and suggestions, then for me, that's the way you should run an organization, right? It's that continuous improvement cycle.
And is that where you're seeing the real value now in terms of Trickle? Is that data and that insight that it can give people to feed into these business decisions? Is that where we're starting to see that benefit?
I think there's two areas, right? One is the data, as you say, but that kind of comes at the end, right? The data comes from the act of doing. So I would say that the most important bit is establishing the new behavior, right? The new habits of understanding what's important and then adapting to that, addressing it, engaging on it, trying to progress it. That's a habit, right? It's a change of habit. It's a mindset. It's a progressive mindset that you're trying to bring into the organization. So part one is very much, here's a very simple process that allows you to focus on improving things day by day, week by week. And then the second part is, here's the data that helps you show the progress that you're making in the form of morale, in the form of any other KPIs that you want to wrap around your organization,
Yeah. Are you noticing that people are this is becoming a key metric, I suppose, at board level? Are people really starting to take note of this, or is it a certain type of company? Is this very focused on startups, or you've mentioned the NHS? That's going from public sector here to some of the startups you may be engaging with. Is there a certain type of business that's really taking this on?
I wouldn't say there's a particular theme. I would say it's probably more down to the mindset of the organization, right? So if you look within health, for example, right, a lot of our early work in health has been in medical education departments, right, which are usually responsible for junior doctor programs. The reason I think that we do well there is that they have a very progressive mindset, right? They've got people that are going to go through a multi-year program, and it's sequential, right? So year one, are we going to go into year two, and we're going to develop into year three? And it's a very challenging environment, right? They're having to look after us, the UK, and they're having to work a lot of hours, the UK population, and they're having to put a lot of hours into doing that, and it can be very stressful. So I think the reason we do well there is that the mindset in that environment is very much, let's understand what these people think are important, right? The people that look after us, and let's make sure they've got the best environment to look after us and learn and progress, right? So I would say it's more a mindset thing and a culture thing within the organization, than a particular theme. If you've got a mindset that's progressive, then you will do very well with an employee engagement platform like ours.
And what about the human? Oh yeah, sorry, right on cue. What about the human touch? Myself and you, through all of the themes, great technology, particularly I'm thinking for that quiet person that has brilliant ideas but won't speak up in a group, this platform is perfect for them. But what about, we talked about AI and all, the thing that's missing is obviously the human touch. How does Trickle, and can that complement the human touch, or would there be other things that you would encourage businesses to do with this data? Like, how do we keep the human touch in such a platform that's all kind of digital online, which is the way it has to go? But what about the human touch and all?
Yeah, and human touch is massive, Natalie. Certainly for me as I guess a leader, right? I've been working now for 30 years, and of all the leaders I've worked with and the people that I've led, right, that human touch, there's no substitute for that. I think where digital platforms can help, like Trickle, is that when you get together, have your team events or your innovation sessions around the whiteboard, it's about celebrating the successes that you've had, right? It's about doing that in person, so you can really focus and use that data to say, look, these are the things that we've done over the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and then use that as an inspiration or a driver to say, look, this is where we need to go now. It just helps show that we're actually achieving things together. But the human touch, no substitute in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you'll maybe get some output from the quietest person in the corner that would maybe not contribute in a human touch meeting or a conversation, but you might get them right behind that keyboard giving you all the ideas, etc. as well, isn't it? So it can definitely
it's a balance, right?
Of benefit, isn't it? It can be complementary. It's not a substitute for having those conversations. It's enabler, isn't it, to have more of these kind of conversations?
My report card at school said quiet works well, right? That was second year at school, I think, and it changed a bit in 4th and 5th year. But I think if a platform like Trickle, when I started in the workplace, okay, I worked more in smaller companies, but would have been really helpful for someone like me, right? Because I was quite introverted and quite quiet in those days, and then I learned that actually speaking up in the workplace had a really positive impact on my career. So hence the journey to Trickle. But there's lots of people that don't feel comfortable to speak up for myriad reasons, right? And I think that's why, optional anonymity is a big part of Trickle. It's something that we spend a lot of time developing and making sure that we've got lots of different settings in there, because every organization wants to use it differently. And that might be not having anonymity at all to, having it in different ways. And for us, it's such a positive, right? Because it allows you to be truly inclusive, right? There's no reason why anyone would say, well, I didn't feel I could be part of that conversation, right? Because there's literally no barrier to entry, because it's truly anonymous, right? It's not like there's a secret control panel where, our CTO can go in and go, hey, that was that guy there, right? It's very deliberately, properly anonymous, and we feel that that's very valuable.
We're laughing, but from the experience, it's right. People will not fill in something at a survey. Who's reading this? Where is it going? Are you sure it won't be linked back to me? What is that number there? Is that linked to? People are they need to know the detail. They need to know the trust before they go to, and then next thing they're typing away and loving it. But you're right in terms of understanding it. And is it quite easy to embed into a business then as well, Paul?
Technically, yeah. So from an implementation perspective, it's like minutes. You get an email invite and you click a link and you're signed up and you're off. There's a little bit of introduction where we help an organization with the communication around it, right? Why are we doing it? So we usually put a big focus around objectives. So when you roll out a platform like ours, we feel it's really important to say, hey, we're bringing this in because, especially when it's got so many different use cases. And also to talk about the objectives, right? So the objectives of our team or of our organization over the next 3 months are X, Y, and Z. And then you start to measure the progress against those objectives in the platform. That's a really, really important way of doing it, and introducing it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the anonymity part of it was really key for our organization. When they first brought it in, that was exactly the first question people said: is this really anonymous? Or, because they, when you get a system like this, you think, oh, I can go in the background and I can see what that person's written or what this person. But you absolutely, you definitely can't. And it's even better the fact that your team that's not something your team can go and look at either, because I think that trust is so valuable in building that employee engagement, because people need to trust the fact that they can give their honest opinion, which is the only way you get to that end result, isn't it? Yeah. It's so important to that, I think. So yeah, it's really valuable that it brings out amazing suggestions, and you're right. I think one of the things we found is that speaking to people who are dealing with this day in, day out, is where you get the best solutions. It's something that everybody's looking for, that blue sky thinking, that ultimate, what's the ultimate solution? Well, actually, we know what it is, and the guys know what it is. They just need you to listen to them and to implement it,
Yeah, and to help support them implement it, right? That's a big part of what we do. It's kind of trying to introduce this culture of shared responsibility. I think in the traditional model that we talk about, right, the hierarchical model, problems are understood in the front line, but then they almost need to get communicated upwards so that somebody can take action and say, right, this is approved, here's an action plan, and then maybe the results come 3 months later. Whereas a big part of Trickle is about being agile, right, which I think is really important in the modern world. It's like, can we empower our teams locally to move this forward themselves, right? We understand this is a challenge. What can we do about it within this team? And if you can empower your organization and the various teams in your organization to do that, then you get the kind of optimal efficiency, in my view, And back to anonymity again, it's funny because a lot of the time, so we use Trickle within Trickle, and we're a small team, right? We're only 15 people. But a lot of the time we'll post Trickles and we'll say, please be anonymous, right? Because it just provides this nice balance, right? This nice neutrality in the conversation. I'll tell you, a lot of the time if I post ideas within Trickle, I post them anonymously, right? Because if I put them down as my name, they've got no chance at all of getting progressed, right? So anonymity helps me massively.
Absolutely, and that is something we put some things out, just some suggestions, and people really engage with it. They get stuck in, and I think you're right. I think if it had come from certain people, there might be a perception of trying to push a certain direction or another direction. Whereas it's anonymous, it just comes out and people go for it. And I think it's really valuable, actually. Are you noticing, and I appreciate this is hard to identify when you've got an anonymous database here, but a generational change? You know, I don't know if you're noticing this as well, Natalie. Are the younger generation that are coming into the workforce now, are they more engaged with this sort of thing, and more engaged and more and looking for that employee engagement, whereas perhaps in years gone by, people have been less inclined. They just come to work, get the job done, and then off they go?
So I think the answer is yes. The younger generation definitely expect it, right? And are probably more engaged because they're digital natives, right? They're mobile first, and they pick these tools up naturally. So I think the answer has to be yes. But what we know from working with organisations like councils, for example, that have, you know, sometimes 3 generations of the same family working in the organisation, we see that really good adoption rates, because, you know, if you can pick up, one of the goals with Trickle, right, is that we don't train people how to use it, right? We train champions, but that's a kind of really small group of people that take that role up within the system. But users we don't train, and the goal is that if you can pick up a phone and use Facebook or Instagram or, you know, Twitter or X, whatever Elon Musk is calling it today, if you can pick these things up and use them, then you can pick up Trickle and you can be engaging literally within minutes, and therefore, you know, across generations where you might think, oh, technology will be a barrier, we tend to find that it is engaged with and used positively, you know.
I think people definitely want to feel much more included these days, don't they? They want to be providing the ideas. They do actually want to be part of the business and providing the solution. And that might be generational, it might not be, but definitely see more trends of the employees speaking up more and having that culture of bringing the ideas, isn't it?
You and I mentioned this before, the chat. We've talked about diversity and inclusion before, and, you know, having diversity is about being asked to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. You know, people want to be included, and it's such a critical part of that. And if you've got a tool like Trickle or any other tool to get people engaged, then it's going to really benefit your company.
Diversity is massive, Ewan, and, you know, to your point, Natalie, I think people do want to be involved. You know, I go back to my comment earlier about work being, you know, the employees are almost interviewing the organisations, because it's like, hey, I want to have a sense of purpose, right? I want to have a sense of the difference that I make when I come to work, right? We all spend so much time at work that it would be a shame to think that folk are just going there and counting down the clock until whenever their shift supposedly ends. You know, it's about trying to make that experience as joyful as possible. In fact, that word is quite interesting, right? I learned this when I started working with the NHS. There's a concept of joy in work, and it's something that select individuals within certain NHS groups we work with actually take a focus around, and that's a phrase, joy in work. And a lot of people think, wow, that sounds like almost like an oxymoron, right? It's like that's not the right phrase, but it's really great. It's really great to see that some organisations are really starting to look at it. It's not just a let's optimize employee experience, but let's focus on joy in work, right? That's, you know, if you talked about that 20 years ago, people would look at you as you have 3 years, you know.
I guess it's moving away from the have fun at work. It's a stage further, isn't it? Because many people have their values that they need to be having fun and have to be enjoying. So I guess the joyful is probably a stage even further again, isn't it? In terms of actually having some love from your job, not just giving the love into the job, but actually taking some love back as well. You're so right. I guess the recruitment process at the moment is just, it is, you're right. Why should come and work for you? That question is asked. Yes, Gen Zs will ask that question before you even start your questions. But it's absolutely, and it always was a two-way process, but never as much as right now. I think people are sussing you out from your website page to your purpose. They're sussing everything out, aren't they, before they even decide, do they want to come and apply for you now?
They totally are. And you know, the other thing is, who owns employee experience within an organisation, right? I think in the old days, it would traditionally be HR, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's HR's job to make sure that everybody's just, you know, having as good a time as possible. But surely that's a collective thing, right? If you can make that a collective thing, then, you know, it's got to be a better experience for everyone. If everyone feels responsible for having a positive input to the working environment.
That's absolutely, Natalie. It's your job to make sure. It was your job to make sure.
I thought HR ruined the fun. Also, we create the fun, but we also ruin the fun. No, and it's those touch points. I guess line managers totally underestimate the impact that they have. But actually, if you look at grievances or non-joyful experiences at the moment, the majority of issues are with people's direct line managers, isn't it? So line managers totally underestimate their presence in the workplace and the impact that they have on their team. You'll probably see it from all the Trickle results and things that come through, Paul, as well. But it's the impact for line managers, and that day-to-day contact has never been as important as it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can get a team structure and a leadership structure where everyone understands each other and you've got a sense of being in it together and a sense of camaraderie, then for me that would be what you'd be looking to achieve, right? And it is crucial, absolutely crucial, especially for juniors coming in. People are getting onboarded now, from their bedrooms, right? And they maybe never meet anyone in the organization for weeks, sometimes months, and that can be a tricky experience. So I think leaders and line managers need to recognize the role they have in that, and making sure that people feel that sense of belonging as soon as possible in their new roles.
And getting that insight from something like Trickle to really help them, because I think that's the thing. A perception is the HR team or HR consultants or whoever will manage that, but actually now giving the information, the evidence to line managers to say, this is you need to be doing, this is why we're doing it, and here's the reasons behind it, and backing it up with some facts and figures. So it makes a massive difference, I think. So just to wrap this whole thing up, we tend to give away three top tips in terms of improving employee engagement. So I wondered if you could give us your top 3 tips from Trickle in terms of improving your employee engagement strategies.
Sure. So again, I like to keep these things simple because I think the process is simple. Number 1, understand in real time what's important to your people, what matters to them most right now. Number 2 would be definitely engage on these things, and if possible, act on them, right? So it's not like, hey, understand all the nonsense and fix it, because that's not practical, and no organization in the world can do that, right? But let's at least engage. So, hey, we can't do this just now because, or this is what we're going to do, and the next step is, right? So step 2 is engage or act. And then step 3 is very much measure, use the data to show the change in your organization as a result of what you're doing. So, this team thought that this was important. Here's what they did on the back of it, and look at the change to their morale, look at the change to the number of positive days they have at work in a month, look at the change to this particular KPI, right? Because in Trickle you can measure, bespoke KPIs as part of that. So it's about understand, it's about act, engage, and it's about measure the difference, so you can say, look, this is a worthwhile process. We are improving things from this cycle.
Thank you very much for all your time today. I appreciate that, Paul. If anybody's looking to get in touch with yourself, can they catch you online, or is it best to go through the website?
Yeah, the website, you'll get me. I'll be on LinkedIn as well. I'm there as Paul Reid Trickle, but mainly through our website, email.
Perfect.
I appreciate you guys inviting me on today.
Thank you for joining us today. It's been really good insight into this employee engagement, and as I say, key topics. So it's something that will continue to come up. So I appreciate your time today. Thanks very much, Paul.
All the best. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening today. Please get in touch if you want to find out more on today's subject.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.